The cheap polyester tie felt like a noose tightening around my neck. It was the last clean one I owned, a relic from a time when job interviews were about career paths, not sheer survival. Now, survival was the only thing on the menu. The debt wasn't just a number on a page. It was a living, breathing monster, a black hole that had swallowed my family's savings, my father's health, and my own future. Every threatening letter, every frantic phone call was another bite taken out of me. I was a college student on paper, but in reality I was just the last man standing on a sinking ship. My roommate Caleb watched me from his perch on our sagging couch, a half-eaten bag of chips in his lap. He saw the tie, the borrowed dress shirt, and the hollowed-out look in my eyes. "Don't tell me," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "You're actually doing it. You're interviewing at that haunted market?" I just finished knotting the tie, my knuckles white. "It's a job, Caleb, a night shift. It pays." He shook his head, a genuine look of concern clouding his face. "Elias, I'm serious. People talk. I heard no one who takes the night shift there ever lasts. They just disappear. Vanish." I forced a brittle laugh. "A ghost is better than an eviction notice. Besides, it's just a convenience store." If only I had known. If only I had listened. The Eternity Market number 13 stood exactly where you'd expect a forgotten place to be, at the end of a dead-end street, isolated like a tombstone. The parking lot was a cracked sea of asphalt, empty save for a few skeletal shopping carts. Above the entrance, the neon sign was a study in decay. The Eater Timar, #13 feet, it stuttered, the letters flickering in a sick, arrhythmic pulse, like the last beats of a dying heart. The building itself looked ancient, its brick facade stained dark with age and secrets. Taking a breath that did nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird in my chest, I pushed open the glass door. A chime, weak and tinny, announced my arrival. Immediately, a wave of cold air washed over me, not the clean, sterile cold of air conditioning, but a damp, crypt-like chill that seemed to cling to my clothes. It carried a scent that turned my stomach. It was the sharp, chemical tang of bleach trying and failing to mask the cloying odor of spoiled meat and something else, something sickeningly sweet, like flowers left to rot in a vase. The store was unnervingly still. A woman stood behind the counter, polishing an already gleaming surface with a stark white cloth. She looked up as I approached, and the air in my lungs froze. Miss Evelyn, I presumed. She was pristine, her black blouse ironed to a perfect crisp, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun without a single stray strand. But her eyes, they were the most unsettling part. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they were utterly, terrifyingly vacant. It was like looking at two polished stones. There was nothing behind them. "You're Elias," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." "For the night shift interview." She gestured to a small, rickety chair in front of the counter. The interview, if you could call it that, began without preamble. There were no questions about my work history, my skills, or my availability. Her questions were scalpels, designed to peel back layers of my psyche. "Are you afraid of silence, Elias?" she asked, her voice as flat and colorless as her eyes. I swallowed. "No, ma'am. A lie." The silence in this place was already making my ears ring. Do you ever feel like you're being watched, even when you're alone? A chill traced a path down my spine. I thought of late nights in the library, the unnerving feeling of a gaze on the back of my neck. "Sometimes," I admitted, trying to sound casual. "Everyone does." She didn't react. Her gaze remained fixed on me. And the final question. "Are you afraid of what you see in the mirror?" The question hung in the cold air between us, bizarre and deeply personal. It was a mad question, one that should have sent me running out the door and never looking back. But I saw the eviction notice in my mind's eye. I saw my mother's tear-streaked face. Desperation was a chain, and it had me bolted to that chair. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I can handle anything you throw at me. I need this job." For the first time, something shifted in her expression. The corner of her pristine lips twitched upward into a nearly imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of warmth or welcome. It was a smile of satisfaction, like a predator that had just seen its prey walk willingly into the snare. "Good," she said, the single word echoing in the cavernous silence. "Very good. The job is yours." Relief was a tidal wave, so powerful it almost drowned the profound sense of dread that came with it. She then led me on a brief, chilling tour. Her heels clicked softly on the linoleum as she pointed out the essentials, her voice a low monotone. She gestured to the rows of security cameras dotting the ceiling. "They see everything," she said. She showed me the stockroom, a cramped space overflowing with boxes. Then she stopped before an immense stainless steel door at the back of the store. It was a commercial freezer, but it looked more like the entrance to a bank vault. A low, electric hum emanated from it, and frost spiderwebbed across the small glass window set in its center. Her voice dropped even lower, becoming flat and heavy, each word a carefully placed stone. "Here, everything must be followed, precisely." She turned to face me, her vacant eyes boring into mine. The night shift, it has its own set of rules. I walked back to my dorm in a daze, the signed employment contract in my pocket feeling less like an opportunity and more like a tombstone I'd carved my own name on. The wave of initial relief had receded, leaving behind a cold, sludgy residue of dread. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, the familiar sounds of the campus, the distant murmur of late-night study groups, the hum of the dorm's ancient heating, offering no comfort. All I could hear was Ms. Evelyn's voice, a flat, deadpan echo in the architecture of my skull. "Are you afraid of silence?" I turned over, burying my face in my pillow. "Do you ever feel like you're being watched?" The shadows in the corner of my room seemed to deepen, to coalesce into something watchful. "Are you afraid of what you see in the mirror?" That was the one that truly unnerved me. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. It implied there was something to be afraid of. When I finally drifted into a shallow, restless sleep, my dreams were of long, empty hallways and the scent of rotting flowers. The next afternoon, I went in for my training session. A man named Marcus was tasked with showing me the ropes. He looked like he hadn't had a good night's sleep in a decade. His face was pale and drawn, with dark, bruised-looking circles under his eyes that spoke of a deep, abiding exhaustion. He walked me through the basic tasks: how to operate the cash register, how to use the pricing gun, how to face the canned goods so the labels were perfectly aligned. He did it all with a strange, detached urgency, his movements quick and jittery. He never once made eye contact. His gaze was constantly flitting toward the corners of the ceiling, the darkened aisles, the large front windows. As we passed the small break room, I overheard two other employees whispering. Their voices were low, but in the unnaturally quiet store, their words carried. "Another one, for the night shift. Poor kid. I wonder if he'll make it through the week." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Marcus heard them too. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just hurried me along toward the stockroom as if fleeing the conversation. He finished the training in less than an hour, gave me a weak non-committal nod, and was gone, leaving me with the distinct impression that he had just passed a death sentence on to me. That night I arrived at 9:40 p.m. The sun had bled out of the sky, leaving a bruised purple twilight in its wake. The parking lot was a vast, empty expanse of shadows, broken only by the single black sedan I now recognized as Ms. Evelyn's. The flickering neon sign seemed even more pathetic and sinister in the encroaching darkness. Inside, the silence was a physical presence. It was so thick and heavy that it pressed in on my eardrums, and I could hear the thrumming pulse of blood in my own ears. I was checking the time on my phone when a soft click of heels on linoleum made me jump. Ms. Evelyn had appeared from a back office as if conjured from the shadows. She handed me a set of cold, heavy keys. "The procedures," she said, her vacant eyes pinning me in place. "Follow them." "Absolutely." There are no exceptions. There was an air of finality in her voice, a starkness that felt less like a manager's instruction and more like a solemn decree. She didn't wish me good luck. She just turned and walked out, her silhouette swallowed by the night. The lock on the front door clicked shut with a sound of profound finality. The sedan's engine turned over, and then its headlights cut a swath through the darkness and disappeared down the street. I was alone, completely. My first task was to change. My uniform was in locker number 13, of course it was. The narrow hallway leading to the employee area was dim, and the air was even colder back here. I found the row of gray lockers and inserted the key into the lock on number 13. The door swung open with a low groan. Inside, a neatly folded dark blue polo shirt and a name tag reading Elias sat on the top shelf. Beneath them, however, was something else. It was a single piece of paper, folded into a small, tight square. It looked ancient, the paper yellowed and brittle with age, the creases worn soft. Dark, ugly stains blotted its corners. My fingers trembled slightly as I unfolded it. The top was neatly typed, the font crisp and official, like a corporate memo. Night Shift Survival Protocols, the Eternity Market number 13. My heart hammered against my ribs. Protocols, not procedures? I started to read the typed list of rules, each one more bizarre than the last. But it was the writing at the bottom that stopped my breath in my lungs. Scrawled beneath the final typed rule, in a shaky, desperate hand, was another message. The ink wasn't black or blue. It was a substance that had dried to a dark, brownish-red, flaking in some places, and it looked disturbingly, unmistakably like blood. These aren't procedures. This is a will. Don't let them complete their inventory check on you. Run! The note was signed with a single, jagged name. Jonah. Jonah's bloody warning felt like a brand on my palm. The yellowed paper trembled in my hand. No longer a strange curiosity, but a terrifying artifact. A final testament from a man who had stood exactly where I was now. Run! The words screamed in my mind. Every instinct, every primal urge to survive, told me to throw down the keys, to smash a window, to get out and never look back. But then, the other horrors flooded in. The eviction notice, my father's medical bills, the crushing, suffocating weight of my family's ruin. Running wasn't an escape. It was just a different kind of death. I was trapped between two nightmares, and I had already chosen the one that paid an hourly wage. With a deep, shuddering breath, I folded the note and shoved it into my pocket. It felt like a cold stone against my leg. My first assigned task, according to the sheet Ms. Evelyn had left, was to restock the canned soup in aisle 7. My eyes fell on the first typed line of the protocols. Rule number 1. Before beginning any stocking task, you must check the security monitor for that aisle. If you see yourself already working there, do not enter the aisle. Lock yourself in the security office and wait exactly 15 minutes. Do not respond if you hear your name. The rule was insane. A prank maybe? But the dried blood on Jonah's note suggested otherwise. My heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I made my way to the small, cramped security office behind the front counter. The room smelled of dust and overheated plastic. A bank of small, grainy, black and white monitors displayed various angles of the silent store. I found the one labeled Aisle 7, and my blood ran cold. Someone was there. A young man with my build, my dark, unruly hair, wearing the same blue polo shirt I'd just put on. He was diligently stocking cans of tomato soup, his movements fluid and efficient. It was me. Every detail was perfect, from the way I tilted my head when concentrating to the worn-out state of my sneakers. I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, as if the world had tilted on its axis. Then, it got worse. As if sensing my gaze, the figure on the screen stopped its work. It slowly, deliberately, turned its head until it was looking directly into the security camera. Directly at me. It gave a wide, friendly smile. It was my smile, the one I practiced in the mirror for job interviews. But on its face it was a horrifying parody. The eyes were hollow, empty voids. The smile didn't reach them. It was a dead thing, a mask of flesh pulled tight over an abyss. From the aisle below, so faint I thought I'd imagined it, a voice whispered my name, Elias. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. I slammed the office door, fumbled with the lock, and slid down to the floor, my back pressed against the wood. I sat there, shaking in the dark, for what felt like an eternity, counting the seconds in my head. 15 minutes. 900 seconds. When the time was finally up, my hands trembling so badly I could barely function, I forced myself to look at the monitor again. Aisle 7 was empty. The cans were perfectly stocked. An hour later I was sweeping the main thoroughfare, trying to lose myself in the simple, mindless task. My mind was a chaotic storm of fear and disbelief. I needed to ground myself, to pretend this was just a normal job. That's when a sound shattered the silence, a loud, explosive crash from aisle 3. I flinched, dropping the broom. Peeking around the end cap, I saw a shattered jar on the floor. Its contents, pickles and vinegary brine, splattered across the pristine linoleum. The sour smell was sharp and overwhelming. My first thought was to get the mop and bucket, but then Jonah's note and the second protocol flashed in my mind. Rule number 2. If an item falls and breaks on its own, do not approach it. Stand perfectly still and count to 180. Do not move, do not clean it up. After 3 minutes, the object will be self-contained. My feet felt rooted to the floor. I stood there, a statue of terror, and began to count. At around the 2-minute mark, I watched in abject horror as the impossible happened. A shard of glass near the edge of the puddle twitched. Then another. Slowly, as if pulled by unseen strings, the shards began to lift from the floor. The puddle of brine contracted, slithering backward into a single glob. Glass and liquid flew together in a silent, mesmerizing vortex, reassembling themselves in midair. Within seconds, a perfect, unbroken jar of pickles hovered where the mess had been. It didn't return to the shelf. With a suddenness that made me yelp, the jar was simply in my hand. It was cold and wet with condensation, its weight solid and undeniable against my palm, even though I hadn't moved an inch. Before I could process this violation of reality, the PA system crackled to life, a burst of static that scraped at my nerves. A cheerful, disembodied voice chirped, "Clean up in aisle 4. My eye shot to the protocol list I'd pulled from my pocket. Rule number 3. If the PA system announces a cleanup, count to 10. If you hear laughter during this count, do not go to the aisle. If there is no laughter, you must proceed to the aisle immediately. I held my breath and counted. 1, 2, 3. Absolute silence. 10. My heart sank. I had to go. With a sense of impending doom, I walked toward aisle 4, the pickle jars still clutched in my hand like a bizarre trophy. The aisle, filled with brightly colored cereal boxes, looked deceptively normal. I took one step into it, and the fluorescent lights overhead flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the aisle into absolute suffocating blackness. A giggle echoed from the far end of the darkness, a child's giggle. It was answered by another from my left, then another, right behind me. The air filled with the sounds of small, frantic footsteps, pattering on the floor, running toward me from all directions. The chorus of innocent giggles swelling into a symphony of malice. I didn't wait. I turned and fled, a raw scream tearing from my throat. I ran blindly, the sound of the laughter and the pattering feet chasing me, nipping at my heels as I scrambled for the relative safety of the break room, slamming the door shut and collapsing against it, my entire body convulsing with terror. Hiding in the sterile confines of the break room, my body still trembling from the phantom chase, a horrifying clarity washed over me. The laughter still echoed in my memory, a cruel counterpoint to the low hum of the vending machine. I wasn't an employee, not really. I was a lab rat in a maze designed by a psychopath. The uniform, the time clock, the pretense of a job, it was all a facade for something else. Jonah's bloody scrawl burned in my mind, Don't let them complete their inventory check on you. These rules, these bizarre and impossible protocols, they weren't for my protection. They were a procedure, a system. They were the steps for processing me, the same way I was supposed to process inventory. Each rule I followed, each test I passed, was another step towards some final, terrible checkout. I wasn't here to work, I was here to be consumed, and the rulebook was the menu. The dread I felt was no longer just fear of the unknown. It was the dawning, soul-crushing certainty of a man who realizes he is prey. But I couldn't stay in the break room. The rules were absolute, and I feared the consequences of breaking them far more than following them. With a will that felt borrowed, I pushed the door open and stepped back into the silent, watchful expanse of the market. My senses were screaming. The air itself felt thick with hostile attention. I could feel unseen eyes on me from the cheerful, smiling faces on the cereal boxes, from the dark reflections in the cooler doors, from the shadowy gaps between the shelves. Every rustle of a stray candy wrapper, every faint whisper from the air conditioning vents, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept glancing at the clock on my phone, the glowing digits a countdown to my next trial. My shift schedule had one entry that stood out, marked only with a time and a location. 3:33 a.m. freezer door. As the minute hand crawled toward that unholy time, I forced my feet to move, walking toward the back of the store. The humming grew louder as I approached the colossal freezer door, a seamless slab of polished casing that loomed like a monolith in the dim light. The cold radiating from it was wrong. It wasn't the clean, mechanical cold of refrigeration. It was a dead, still cold, a profound absence of heat that felt ancient and unnatural, a cold that emanated from a place where warmth had never existed. I stood before it, my own breath pluming in the frigid air, waiting. Precisely at 3:33 a.m. it began. The small, circular light set above the door flickered once. My heart seized. It flickered a second time. The words from the protocol list rose in my throat like bile. A third and final flicker. I had to speak. I had to complete the ritual. My voice, when it came out, was a pathetic, cracking whisper, barely audible in the crushing silence. I acknowledge your presence. For a moment, nothing. The silence stretched, becoming heavier, deeper, until it felt like a physical weight. Then, a voice answered. It was not one voice, but many, a chorus of faint, dry whispers that seemed to come from inside the freezer and from everywhere at once. We acknowledge you. The temperature plummeted instantly. The air turned to ice, so cold it felt like it was tearing at my lungs. My breath, which had been a white cloud, now seemed to freeze an inch from my lips. I stared at the small, frosted window in the center of the door, my horror complete. Blue, frost-bitten hands began to press against the glass from the inside. One pair, then two, then five, then more than I could count. They were the hands of men and women, all pale and marbled with decay, their fingers splayed in desperation. As I watched, the condensation on the inside of the glass began to shift. The moisture wasn't random. It was forming shapes, the shapes of screaming faces. Dozens of them swirled in the swirling frost, mouths wide in silent, eternal agony. One face pushed forward, becoming clearer than the rest. It was a man, his features twisted in an impossible mask of torment, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended life and death. His mouth stretched, opening wider and wider until it was a black, cavernous hole. He was trying to scream his way through the glass. I fell backward, scrambling away on my hands and knees, a choked gasp, my only sound. I couldn't tear my eyes away, even as my mind threatened to shatter. When I blinked, clearing the tears of sheer terror from my vision, it was all gone. The hands were gone. The faces were gone. The window was just a pane of glass, opaque with a thick, undisturbed layer of frost. But the cold remained. The frigid air of the aisle was nothing compared to the ice that had just formed in my soul. That cold, I knew, would never leave. The bone-deep cold from the freezer lingered, a phantom chill that had taken root inside me. I spent the next hour in a state of heightened paranoia, flinching at every sound, my eyes darting into the shadows. The market no longer felt empty. It felt crowded, populated by the silent, screaming souls trapped behind that door. I was just another ghost in training. At 4:45 a.m., a new sound cut through the silence, one I hadn't prepared for, the soft electronic whir of the automatic doors sliding open. My head snapped up. Through the front windows, I saw that the night was still a pitch-black canvas. No car had pulled up, no one should be here. I ducked behind the checkout counter, my heart pounding a frantic drum solo against my ribs. I fumbled for Jonah's note, my trembling fingers scanning the blood-stained paper for the next protocol. Rule number 5. If a customer enters after 4 a.m., do not greet them, do not speak. First, look at their feet. If their feet do not touch the ground, or if they cast no shadow, lock yourself in the security office until dawn. If they appear normal, you must treat them as a regular customer. Peeking over the edge of the counter, I saw her. A tall, elegant woman in a simple, form-fitting black dress was walking slowly down the main aisle. My eyes immediately dropped to the floor. Her black heels clicked softly on the linoleum, each footfall solid and sure. I followed her progress by watching her shadow, a perfectly normal, dark shape that stretched and contracted under the fluorescent lights. She seemed real. Relief, weak and tentative, trickled through me. A lost traveler? Someone who didn't realize the time? I stood up, smoothing my uniform, my mind scrambling for the right words. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we're closed." I took a step toward her. She stopped by a display of brightly colored candy bars and turned to face me. And the universe broke. Where her face should have been, eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was nothing. Just a smooth, unbroken, porcelain-like expanse of skin. It was seamless, featureless, a terrifying blank oval atop her elegant neck. I froze, a scream caught in my throat like a shard of glass. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The sight was so fundamentally wrong, so grotesquely impossible that my mind simply refused to process it. Then, it spoke. But the voice didn't come from the horrifying blankness of her head. It came from everywhere at once. A chorus of echoes bouncing off the polished floor, the glass cooler doors, the security camera domes. It even seemed to whisper from the reflection in my own terrified eyes. "Elias," the voice resonated, calm and unnervingly pleasant. "You're doing much better than Jonah." The mention of his name sent a shockwave of ice through my veins. This thing knew. It knew about the note. It knew about him. "What are you?" I stammered, my voice a ragged whisper. The featureless head tilted slightly, a gesture of mock curiosity. "I am the enforcer," the composite voice explained as if discussing the weather. "The warden of this place. The rules are not suggestions, Elias. They are the laws of this reality. I ensure they are followed." To torment me, to prove its power, the voice shifted. Suddenly, it was no longer a disembodied chorus, but a single panicked voice. Jonah's voice, filled with the same desperate terror I'd felt in his bloody handwriting. "Help me. It's so cold in here. Don't let it happen to you." The plea echoed through the store, a ghostly cry from a frozen hell. The warden's true voice returned, smooth and cruel. He was so disappointing. He broke rule number 3. Laughter always did unnerve him. "But you are proving far more resilient. This is much more entertaining." I realized with sickening certainty that this creature wasn't trapped here. It wasn't a prisoner like the souls in the freezer. It was a predator, a zookeeper, and it enjoyed its work. This was its hunt. Pure, instinctual terror finally broke my paralysis. I turned and ran. Her laughter filled the store, a sound that wasn't human. It was the cacophony of her multi-surfaced voice, a shattering, discordant peal of amusement that seemed to warp the very space around me. The aisles, once straight and orderly, now seemed to twist and curve. forming a labyrinth of madness. The colorful product boxes became leering faces, their brand mascots mocking me. I sprinted for the break room, my only known sanctuary, her laughter chasing me like a physical force. I slammed the door and threw my weight against it, my lungs burning, my mind fraying at the edges. But the door offered no protection from her. Her voice pierced the walls as if they weren't there, a calm, cutting whisper that slid directly into my brain. "There is no hiding, Elias. The game is not over. I still have so many tests for you before the sun comes up. Let's see how you handle the next one." The break room was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cage. The warden's voice seeped through the walls, a constant, tormenting presence in my mind. She was toying with me, a cat with a cornered mouse, and my only hope was to cling to the rules that had, so far, kept me alive. But I soon learned that the warden made the rules, and she could break them just as easily. Her voice echoed, not in the store, but inside my head. "Time for a new game, Elias. Let's test your multitasking skills." A loud clatter came from aisle 2. A can of peaches had fallen from a shelf. My body tensed, my mind immediately snapping to rule number 2. Stand perfectly still. Count to 180. I froze in place, my feet glued to the linoleum, and began the silent count. 1, 2, 3. But before I reached 10, the PA system crackled to life, the sound sharp and jarring. The cheerful, disembodied voice chirped, "Clean up in aisle 4. My blood ran cold. This was impossible. I couldn't follow both rules. Rule number 3 demanded I count to 10, and if there was no laughter, proceed immediately to the aisle. But rule number 2 demanded I remain motionless for 3 full minutes. The rules were now in direct conflict. This wasn't a test of adherence. It was a trap. She was forcing me to fail. As if to punctuate my no-win scenario, the innocent, giggling laughter of children began to echo from aisle 4, a sound that now curdled my stomach. The laughter invalidated my need to go there, but it didn't solve my initial dilemma, the fallen can. The warden was methodically dismantling my defenses, cornering me by making the very framework of my survival contradictory. Panic set in, a wild, thrashing thing in my chest. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't follow the rules. My only thought was to flee, to find somewhere, anywhere, to escape her omnipresent gaze. The security office. It had a lock. It felt safer than this open space. I broke from my frozen stance and ran, the sound of the children's laughter morphing into the warden's cool, mocking chuckle. But as I sprinted past the end caps, the store began to change in a new and horrifying way. The path to the security office, once a straight shot, now seemed to stretch, the office door receding into the distance. And then I saw them. My doppelgangers. They were no longer stocking shelves. They were scattered throughout the aisles, reenacting scenes from my life. But not the good parts. In aisle 3, a version of me with tear-streaked cheeks sat on the floor, clutching a rejection letter from my dream university, a failure I had never told anyone about. Near the dairy case, another me was on the phone, his shoulders slumped, receiving the news of my father's diagnosis, his face a mask of crumbling disbelief. The warden was peeling back the layers of my mind, projecting my deepest pains and humiliations onto these hollow facsimiles for her own amusement. The children's laughter, which still echoed faintly, began to change too. The innocent giggles twisted and deepened, becoming the voices of people I had lost. I heard my grandmother, her voice frail and reedy as it was in her last days, calling my name mournfully from the frozen foods section. I heard the voice of a childhood friend, lost to an accident years ago, whispering my name from the shadowy recesses of the pharmacy aisle. She wasn't just breaking the market's rules, she was breaking the rules of my reality, turning my own memories into weapons against me. Gasping, half-sobbing, I finally reached the security office and slammed the door, fumbling with the lock. I collapsed into the chair, my eyes darting to the bank of monitors, hoping for a moment's reprieve. But there was no escape. The screens no longer showed the static, predictable angles of the store. One monitor showed me from above. as if a camera were mounted directly over my head. Another showed my own terrified face in extreme close-up, though there was no camera in the room with me. The warden was on every screen, her featureless face a blank slate of absolute power. And on the monitor displaying the hallway just outside the door, I saw them, my doppelgangers. The one who had failed his exam, the one who had lost his father, the one who had been rejected. They were all there, a silent congregation of my life's greatest miseries. And slowly, in unison, they began to climb the stairs, their dead, hollow eyes fixed on the office door. The siege had begun. The rhythmic, shuffling footsteps of my failures echoed from the hallway, a slow, deliberate march toward my tomb. They were coming. The warden's voice whispered from the monitors, a silken thread of poison weaving through the fabric of my sanity. "Nowhere to run, Elias. It's time for your final review." The doorknob began to jiggle. Trapped, cornered, and drowning in a sea of my own resurrected pain, something inside me didn't break. It snapped into focus. It was a desperate, wild clarity, born from having nothing left to lose. The rules. The doppelganger. The shattered jar. The laughter. The freezer. The warden herself. They were all pieces of a single, monstrous puzzle. And in that moment of pure, undiluted terror, I had an epiphany. The rules weren't just a trap. They weren't just a procedure for my demise. They were a cage, yes, but perhaps not just for me. They were a system of logic. And any system, no matter how perverse, has weaknesses. It has boundaries. It has its own set of chains. With a guttural cry that was more defiance than fear, I shoved the chair back and wrenched open the office door. The doppelganger of my grief-stricken self was right there, its hand reaching for the knob. I didn't hesitate. I shoved past it, the touch of its arm cold and insubstantial, like passing through a pocket of frigid air. I didn't run for the exit. I ran straight for the heart of the cold. Straight for the freezer. The warden's laughter faltered, replaced by a note of genuine surprise. "A bold choice, Elias. Rushing to your own preservation?" I ignored her, my feet pounding on the linoleum. I reached the massive, humming freezer and, without a second's thought, grabbed the heavy latch and pulled. The door swung open with a groan of protesting hinges, releasing a blast of profound, sepulchral cold. The sight within was a grotesque diorama of eternal damnation. It wasn't empty. Jonah was there, frozen solid, his hand still gripping a mop, his face a permanent mask of shock and agony. Beside him were others, a woman in a faded uniform from a decade past, her hand forever reaching for a box of frozen peas, a man in a tattered shirt perpetually halfway through stocking a shelf. They were all here. The failures. The ones who had broken the rules and been processed, their final moment of terror flash-frozen for eternity. Jonah's other hand was clutched around a pen, the one he must have used to scrawl his last warning. The light inside the freezer began to flicker, once, twice. The warden appeared in the doorway behind me, a silent, faceless silhouette. "It is not your time for this ritual," she warned, her composite voice taking on a sharp edge. The light flickered a third time. Ignoring her, I filled my lungs with the icy air and screamed the ritual phrase into the frozen abyss. "I acknowledge your presence." This time, the result was different. The frozen corpses didn't press against the glass or form screaming visages. Instead, in a single, unified motion that defied all laws of nature, they all turned their heads. Their movements were stiff, accompanied by the faint, dry crackle of ice. And their frozen, milky eyes, full of an ancient, trapped agony, stared not at me but past me. They stared directly at the warden. And I finally understood. The absolute, soul-shattering truth of this place crashed down on me. The warden wasn't their master, she was their jailer. She enforced the rules because she too was bound by them. She was a prisoner of the same system. The souls trapped in this icy hell were not just her trophies. They were her wardens, the source of the very power that defined her existence. And she was terrified of them. "You're bound too," I yelled, my voice ringing with newfound strength. I turned my back on the freezer and took a step toward her. A can of corn sat on the floor, having fallen from a shelf moments before in the chaos. A test I had ignored. Deliberately, I bent down and picked it up. Long before 3 minutes had passed, I had broken rule number 2. The warden flinched as if struck. A flicker of static seemed to run through her form. Behind me, from inside the freezer, a low, collective groan echoed, not of pain, but of something stirring, gaining strength. "You're just a glorified middle manager," I snarled, walking past one of my doppelgangers without checking a monitor, shattering rule number 1. The warden recoiled again, her featureless face seeming to ripple. The groaning from the freezer grew louder, more defined. With every rule I consciously and deliberately broke, her form seemed to weaken, to lose its sharp definition, while the tormented souls behind me gained a terrible, focused presence. The balance of power was shifting. I wasn't just breaking the rules of the store, I was breaking the rules of her prison. Cornered and losing control, the warden radiated an aura of pure, desperate fury. The air crackled with her silent rage. She had been the enforcer, the unquestioned authority in this pocket of reality, and now a desperate college kid was dismantling her kingdom rule by broken rule. She had one last, desperate move to make, a final assertion of the power that was now slipping through her fingers. "The rules will be obeyed." Her voice boomed, not from the surfaces around me, but from the very fabric of the air itself, a sound so powerful it rattled my teeth. Then she broke her own cardinal rule. She levitated. Her feet, which had been the one anchor of her normality, lifted from the pristine linoleum floor. She rose a foot, then 2, floating in the center of the aisle like a dark messiah. As her feet left the ground, her shadow, which had been her one claim to a physical presence, vanished completely. She was no longer pretending to be a part of this world. The moment her contract with this reality was broken, the world shattered. It wasn't a loud explosion, but a sickening, silent unraveling. The aisles, once solid and defined, began to stretch and distort, their shelves elongating into impossible, infinite corridors of mocking product labels. The ceiling tore open like old fabric, not revealing a night sky, but a starless, bottomless black void, an absolute nothingness that drank the light. The very floor beneath my feet seemed to lose its solidity, rippling like dark water. The warden's form convulsed. The smooth, featureless skin of her face began to crack like sun-baked clay, fissures spreading from an unseen epicenter. They weren't bleeding. They were just opening, revealing a hollow, swirling emptiness within. She was coming apart, her borrowed form dissolving back into the abyss from which it was spawned. The market, a meticulously crafted illusion, was collapsing in on itself. My gambit had worked, but I had doomed myself along with her. The entire false reality was being unmade, and I was at its epicenter. Survival instinct kicked in, raw and primal. I had to get out. The main entrance, which now seemed miles away down a warping, twisting hallway, was my only hope. I scrambled forward, my feet slipping on the buckling floor. The frozen souls from the freezer, now free of their icy prison, were silent, dark shapes pouring out into the collapsing store, not as physical bodies but as currents of pure, vengeful energy, swarming the dissolving form of the warden. They weren't interested in me. Their score was with her. I reached the front doors, my lungs burning, the void above threatening to swallow me whole. The automatic mechanism was dead. I slammed my shoulder against the glass to no avail. The emergency lever. I saw the red handle by the frame and wrestled with it, my fingers numb and clumsy with panic. The space around me was disintegrating, the cheerful colors of the store bleeding into a monochromatic gray, the sounds of reality being erased, replaced by a deafening roar of absolute silence. With a final desperate heave, the lock disengaged. I threw the door open and stumbled out into the pre-dawn gloom, falling onto the cracked, solid asphalt of the parking lot. I landed hard, scraping my hands and knees. The pain, a glorious, welcome sensation. It was real. As the first faint rays of dawn pierced the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft orange, I looked back. The Eternity Market number 13 didn't crumble to dust or implode, it simply vanished. One moment it was a collapsing nightmare, and the next there was nothing. Just an empty, derelict lot at the end of a dead-end street, as if the store had never been there at all. I was free. The thought was so overwhelming, so euphoric, that I started to laugh, a ragged, half-crazed sound. I pushed myself up, my body aching, my mind a shredded mess, and stumbled toward my car. I had survived. I had faced the abyss and walked away. I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar feel of the worn fabric a comfort. My hands were shaking too badly to start the engine, so I just sat there, taking deep, shuddering breaths of the cool morning air. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, and my laughter died in my throat. The face looking back at me wasn't my own. Where my tired, terrified eyes, my nose, my mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, unbroken, featureless expanse of skin. A wave of cold, final understanding washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of hope. I hadn't escaped. I had won. I had survived the night. I had understood the rules so completely that I had learned how to break them. I had confronted the warden and unmade her. And in doing so, I had taken her place. The keys in my pocket were no longer for my beat-up sedan. They were for the pristine black sedan parked a few spaces away. Ms. Evelyn's car. It was my car now. I didn't get the job. I got the job. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the empty lot, a flicker of movement caught my eye. On a different street corner, a block away, a squat brick building shimmered into existence. Above its door, a neon sign crackled to life, its eerie glow cutting through the morning haze. In the window, a single stark sign began to glow with a familiar, predatory light. Help wanted. The loop was eternal. And tonight, I would be back, waiting for another desperate soul to apply.